Before leaving this world, Gene Hackman broke. Decades of silence, revealing a staggering truth about Clint Eastwood. That Hollywood never dared to speak. It wasn't just a confession. It was a direct strike at a legend. What did Hackman endure on the set of Unforgiven? What compelled him to break his silence after years of restraint? And most crucially, why did Eastwood never want this truth to come to light? This isn't just a behind-the-scenes revelation. It's a reckoning, an untold mystery buried for 3 decades, a secret powerful enough to reshape the legacy of 2 Hollywood giants. Chapter 1. The Perfect Storm, Hackman, Eastwood, and the Art of Villainy. Gene Hackman and Clint Eastwood. 2 titans of Hollywood, 2 irreplaceable icons of American cinema. One embodied ruggedness, resilience, and an unflinching gaze into humanity's darker depths. The other exuded cool restraint, a man of few words but immense presence. When their paths collided in Unforgiven, 1992, the result was cinematic history. But behind the camera, it wasn't just an artistic partnership. It was a clash of 2 forces, a storm brewing beneath the surface, unseen by the public. From the start of his career, Gene Hackman stood apart. He lacked the effortless charm of his contemporaries, the easy charisma that won over audiences. Instead, he brought a raw intensity to the screen, a magnetism born from authenticity and masterful transformation. Whether in The French Connection or The Conversation, Hackman didn't just portray characters, he became them, immersing himself in roles with unmatched depth. But in Unforgiven, Hackman wasn't just an actor, he was a force of nature. His portrayal of Little Bill Daggett, the domineering, morally ambiguous sheriff, remains one of cinema's most chilling villains. What made Little Bill so terrifying wasn't senseless cruelty, but his unwavering belief that he was right. That conviction fueled his menace. Justice, in his mind, was his to enforce, no matter how ruthless his methods. Hackman understood this character down to his very core, embodying him with a level of immersion that turned the Unforgiven set into a pressure cooker. Eastwood, by contrast, was the polar opposite. As a director, he wasn't one to micromanage. He let actors discover their characters naturally, without excessive interference. In an interview with IndieWire, Eastwood once remarked, "Sometimes I rehearse with actors, sometimes I don't." Actors usually have a strong sense of their characters from the start. It's what draws them to the role. Some rely on pure instinct, immediately embodying the character. Gene Hackman was one of them. From the very first take of Unforgiven, Hackman's portrayal of Little Bill was flawless. Eastwood barely needed to direct him. Reflecting on it later, Eastwood remarked, "A great example would be Gene Hackman in Unforgiven. He had the character down perfectly right out of the box, every shot, every sequence. He never had to change a thing. He was amazing. But that level of immersion came with a price. When an actor dives too deep, sometimes they struggle to pull back. Hackman was exactly the case. While Eastwood was a director who valued efficiency and minimal interference, Hackman was relentless in his pursuit of perfection. He wasn't satisfied with good enough. He needed every moment to feel utterly real. That drive led to one of the most explosive moments on set. One of Unforgiven's pivotal scenes features Little Bill ruthlessly beating English Bob, played by Richard Harris, in front of the town, asserting his absolute dominance. The scene was shot multiple times, but Hackman felt it lacked the necessary weight. He pushed for retakes, demanding a rawer, more brutal authenticity, while Eastwood preferred a more restrained approach. No one knows exactly what happened next, but crew members recall Hackman losing his temper, slamming his hand on a table, and raising his voice at Eastwood, a rare outburst for an actor known for professionalism and composure. Yet Eastwood remained unshaken. Without flinching, he simply responded, "We'll do it one more time. If you feel it's right, we'll keep it." That take made the final cut. It cemented Little Bill's brutality in the minds of audiences, making him one of the most feared and despised villains in cinema. Eastwood had a distinct filmmaking philosophy. He disliked excessive retakes, believing that authenticity often shone through in the earliest attempts. If an actor delivered a perfect performance on the spot, he'd start rolling immediately. Hackman exemplified this principle. In another intense scene where Little Bill torments Ned Logan, Eastwood originally planned to rehearse first. adjusting angles before filming, but Hackman, completely consumed by the character, launched into the performance, cold, calculating, his smirk dripping with cruelty. Watching from the monitor, Eastwood didn't hesitate. He signaled the cinematographer to start rolling, knowing he had just captured a moment too raw and powerful to recreate. As Eastwood once said, "Sometimes, when I'm rehearsing for a camera move, the performance is so good that I just turn the camera on. I don't want to lose it." That's why Unforgiven became one of the greatest works in both their careers. Looking back, Unforgiven wasn't just a film. It was a battleground for two creative powerhouses with opposing styles. But that very contrast, the storm of Hackman's intensity against Eastwood's measured control, forged a timeless masterpiece. Hackman's Little Bill wasn't a typical villain. He was the embodiment of twisted authority, misguided righteousness, and the chilling reality of justice wielded as a weapon. And through Hackman's total commitment, Unforgiven became more than just a movie. It became a reckoning. Dedication and passion made Gene Hackman one of cinema's most unforgettable antagonists. But what was the cost of that brilliance? Did Hackman regret diving so deeply into the role? And more crucially, did Unforgiven mark the beginning of his drift from Hollywood? The answers lie ahead. Chapter 2. The Clash of Giants, Hackman versus Eastwood on set. Hollywood has witnessed its fair share of legendary on-set clashes, but few were as subtle and simmering as the tension between Gene Hackman and Clint Eastwood during the filming of Unforgiven. On screen, they embodied opposing forces: Little Bill Daggett, the ruthless sheriff who ruled with an iron fist, and William Money, a weary gunslinger reluctantly drawn back to violence. But behind the scenes, their opposition wasn't just acting. It was a battle over artistic vision, character depth, and even control of the narrative. One lingering question remains. Were scenes that added layers to Little Bill's character deliberately cut from the final film? And if so, did Eastwood, as director, make those choices to keep the spotlight on his own character? Let's uncover the truth. A clash of creative philosophies. Clint Eastwood was known for his minimalist, no-frills approach to filmmaking. He avoided unnecessary complexity, preferring characters to reveal themselves through action rather than lengthy dialogue or introspection. To him, Little Bill Daggett was a straightforward despot, an authoritarian sheriff who convinced himself he was upholding order, while, in reality, he was spreading fear. Gene Hackman, however, approached character differently. He was a master at uncovering psychological depth, committed to making his roles feel as real and nuanced as possible. He didn't want Little Bill to be a mere villain. He believed that what made the character truly terrifying was his own belief that he was the hero. Hackman fought to include moments that showcased Little Bill's inner conflict, scenes that would reveal his motivations and contradictions. But Eastwood disagreed. He insisted on keeping Little Bill as originally scripted, a brutal lawman whose misguided righteousness made him all the more dangerous. This creative divide sparked tension on set. The lost scenes. Several film scenes never made it into the final cut. One in particular, Little Bill alone at night in his unfinished house, offered a haunting glimpse into his psyche. Seated on a wooden chair, hammer and nail in hand, he worked in dim candlelight, the soft tap of metal on wood echoing through the quiet. The scene revealed a man obsessed with control, clinging to order in a world he saw as chaotic. His empty stare, tinged with exhaustion and quiet loneliness, hinted at the cost of his unyielding nature. But the scene vanished. Rumors suggest Eastwood removed it to prevent audiences from sympathizing with Little Bill. For him, Unforgiven wasn't about the sheriff. It was about Willie, where he genuinely saw himself as the town's protector. Eastwood countered that the story needed a stark villain to heighten the contrast with Money. One witness recalls Hackman finally telling Eastwood bluntly, "If you want a villain, fine," Hackman said, "but if you want a real man, let me show you what he's made of." Eastwood's reply was calm, almost dismissive. "We already know what he is." The exchange didn't escalate, but it left a mark. Hackman couldn't sway Eastwood, and the scenes he believed added depth to Little Bill were left on the cutting room floor. When Unforgiven won multiple Oscars, most agreed Eastwood's approach had worked. This wasn't Little Bill's story. It was William Money's. Everything else was just a backdrop for his transformation. Yet, for Hackman's admirers, one question lingers. If those cutscenes had remained, would Little Bill have been even more unforgettable? Did that thought gnaw at Hackman? Perhaps that's why he stayed silent about the film for so long, until years later, he finally decided to break his silence. What did Hackman reveal, and why now? The story isn't over. Chapter 3. The Unspoken Truth. What Hackman finally revealed. Hollywood harbors secrets, stories buried in the shadows, forgotten or deliberately concealed, until someone decides to speak. Gene Hackman was a private man, avoiding gossip in Hollywood's spotlight. After retiring, he largely faded from public view. But before leaving this world, he felt compelled to share one last truth, a revelation about Clint Eastwood that even the director's staunchest fans couldn't have imagined. It was about Unforgiven. It was about Clint Eastwood. And it was about how Hackman was pushed to his breaking point as an actor. For years, Hackman said little about Unforgiven, despite it being one of his most celebrated performances. While Eastwood and others frequently praised the film in interviews, Hackman sidestepped discussions. When asked, he would offer a faint smile, call it a memorable experience, and move on. But those close to him knew the truth. Hackman had mixed feelings about the film. "It was one of the best roles I ever played," he admitted once, "but also the hardest." He never elaborated, but in his final days, reflecting on his vast career, Hackman decided silence was no longer an option. In a private conversation with a veteran journalist, he finally spoke. What he revealed shook Hollywood to its core. The ruthless truth. The word Hackman used to describe Eastwood's directing style. Ruthless. It seemed at odds with the image of Clint Eastwood, the calm, reserved, soft-spoken filmmaker with an icy precision. But for Hackman, that ruthlessness wasn't about power. It was about method. Eastwood's style, Hackman claimed, pushed actors to their limits, forcing them to bear everything, whether they were ready or not. Hackman was no stranger to demanding directors. He had worked with the likes of Francis Ford Coppola and William Friedkin, men known for their relentless pursuit of perfection. But Eastwood was different. "Clint doesn't believe in second chances," Hackman said. "He wants you to hit the right note right away." For Hackman, this was unlike any pressure he had ever faced. In other films, he could experiment, refine, and develop a performance over multiple takes. But on Unforgiven, "I remember one scene where I thought I could do it better. I told Clint, 'Give me another take.' He just looked at me and said, 'No need.'" Hackman was stunned. To him, no scene was perfect on the first go. But Eastwood wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing truth. Thus, if a take felt real, that was the one he kept. It forced Hackman into an unfamiliar space. He felt stripped of control over his performance, unable to shape his character the way he normally would. Instead, he had to rely entirely on instinct. And that was terrifying. It was terrifying. But maybe that's why it worked. Once was enough. Hackman never publicly criticized Eastwood. He wasn't one for behind-the-scenes drama. But when asked in later years if he would work with Eastwood again, he would simply smile and say, "Once is enough." That could mean two things: an admission that the experience was too grueling, or a quiet acknowledgement that Unforgiven was a rare, lightning-in-a-bottle moment, one he could never replicate. When Hackman's revelation surfaced, Hollywood was divided. Some agreed that Eastwood's unyielding style was the secret behind his legendary films. Others felt it was too rigid, placing unnecessary pressure on actors. Regardless, Unforgiven remains a masterpiece. And Hackman's portrayal of Little Bill Daggett, cutscenes or not, stands as one of cinema's most unforgettable villains. Before fading from Hollywood's spotlight, Hackman left one final thought about Eastwood. "He made me do things I never thought I could do." And maybe that's what a great director does. Was it a rebuke or admiration? Perhaps both. Either way, Hackman's legacy was sealed, and Unforgiven shines as one of his brightest gems. But one final question remains. Would Clint Eastwood ever respond to Hackman's words? And was his ruthless approach truly the key to his masterpieces? The story isn't over. Chapter 4. The Price of Perfection. How Hackman Nearly Quit Hollywood. Hollywood is unforgiving, even for legends. Behind the Oscar gold, the standing ovations, and the glowing reviews lies a brutal industry, one that can break even the strongest actors. And Gene Hackman, for all his greatness, was no exception. Continued. Before Unforgiven became a defining moment in his career, Gene Hackman seriously considered walking away from Hollywood. Many believe his intense experience working with Clint Eastwood on the film pushed him to his breaking point, making him contemplate leaving the industry in the 90s rather than waiting until his official retirement in 2004. But was it really that simple? Hackman was never one to shy away from demanding roles. Throughout the 70s and 80s, he gravitated toward complex, flawed characters, figures with rough edges who weren't always crowd pleasers. This commitment to authenticity made him a titan of his era, but it also took a toll. Gene always pushed himself to the limit, a close friend once revealed. He didn't just act, he lived inside the character. That level of immersion resulted in unforgettable performances, but it also drained him, both physically and mentally. By the late 80s, after back-to-back intense films like Mississippi Burning, 1988, and Narrow Margin, 1990, signs of burnout started to show. Hollywood's relentless pace had worn him down. I started to wonder if I had anything left to give, Hackman later admitted. It was in this uncertain state that he accepted a role in Unforgiven, a decision that would forever change his view of his career. As noted in earlier chapters, working with Clint Eastwood was no easy feat, even for a seasoned actor like Hackman. Eastwood's fast, no-nonsense directing style left little room for hesitation or second takes. For Hackman, this proved especially difficult. He thrived on experimentation, using multiple takes to refine his characters and perfect a scene. But Eastwood had a different philosophy. He didn't chase perfection, he chased truth. Clint had a way of making you feel like you were always on the edge of a cliff, Hackman later reflected. One of his most challenging moments came during Unforgiven's climactic showdown, where Little Bill Daggett, his character, finally falls to Eastwood's William Money. It was a moment of reckoning where everything Little Bill believed in, law, power, morality, came crashing down. The scene demanded raw emotion, but Eastwood only allowed one take. Hackman pleaded for another chance, but Eastwood stood firm. "No need, it's done," he said. Hackman was stunned. It wasn't that he doubted his own performance. He just felt robbed of the chance to explore the character's depths as he had envisioned. That moment left him questioning everything. Do I still want to do this? Hollywood insiders have long speculated that, after Unforgiven, Hackman seriously considered retiring. If this was the new reality of filmmaking, where actors had less creative control over their roles, maybe it was time to walk away. But something changed his mind. Ironically, the very film that had exhausted him also brought him one of his greatest triumphs. His portrayal of Little Bill Daggett earned him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, reaffirming that, despite the struggles, cinema was in his blood. Rather than quitting immediately, Hackman stayed, but on his own terms. He no longer chased blockbuster projects, instead choosing only roles that truly interested him. This shift led to some of his most memorable later performances, including The Birdcage, 1996, Enemy of the State, 1998, and The Royal Tenenbaums, 2001. Yet, the strain of Unforgiven never fully left him. Perhaps that's why, just a few years later, he finally bid Hollywood farewell for good. Had he retired right after Unforgiven, audiences would have missed out on some of his most beloved films. But the real question isn't about the movies he never made. It's about whether an earlier exit would have brought him peace. Or did those final years in Hollywood reveal something he hadn't realized before? Only Hackman could answer that. Now, his story is part of Hollywood lore, a tale of grit, artistry, and the cost of chasing perfection.